Up to this point, Emerson has looked pretty much as it did since it was built in 1908. The lighting remained the same, the paneling remained the same. The only thing that changed was the furniture and the carpeting. Obviously the kitchen changed, but the dining hall itself has been the same since it was built in 1908, when it was described by an architectural magazine as the most beautiful dining hall in the United States. The fact that it has remained unchanged and that it has been a gathering place, a place where students not only ate, but at the beginning, all of their female faculty members ate with them as well, and that there were many traditions associated with Emerson, such as class dinners, the mummers' play during the holidays. There have been dances there. When Dale Rogers Marshall retired as president, she loved to dance, so they put up a dance floor and she danced all night long. It's one of those places on campus where all of the traditions are positive. They're all pleasant. It's been a gathering place for many years, and of course the new design is to make it a different kind of gathering place where there can be dances, because there will be a dance floor, and I think it's going to be more of a cafe with comfortable seating and so forth. So one of the interesting things about it was that because it was the first separate dining hall at Wheaton, built in 1908, it's kind of looked the same. You know, the rows of tables with chairs, it has looked the same for more than 100 years. And it's going to take some getting used to for it to look different. The original lights fixtures have been in place since 1908 until now. I know they want to upgrade the lighting, make it a brighter space, because they're planning to have it be more of an event space. So the lights will be dimmable, which the others were not. They're like discs, as opposed to the globes, the crystal globes that were there from its construction until now. The original fixtures have all been salvaged, and right now they are in storage in Emerson basement in a locked, caged area that is in the control of the archives. So I believe that the college is going to try to have someone come and appraise them to see what their value is. If they decide to sell them, then the archives is going to retain one of each. So one of the crystal globes, one of the wall sconces, and the porch lights were different, but one of those as well. The kitchens have been changed. Not as often as you might think, but they've put in new equipment in the kitchens. The biggest change that happened in Emerson was adding the faculty dining room in the 1950s. That was one of the innovations of President Alexander Howard Meneely, who had faculty housing constructed for the first time and faculty dining room, because up until that point, all the female faculty, with the exception of one, were unmarried, and therefore they had to live in the dormitories with the students. They had their own suites, but they lived in the dormitories and they ate all their meals with students. And when the faculty dining hall was built, that allowed, at first the women faculty had breakfast and lunch there and still ate dinner with the students, but then later on they were allowed to eat all 3 meals there. They got their food in the main dining hall, but they could go into the faculty dining room to eat. And then later on, the lounge was developed. It's not as obvious. The lounge isn't as obvious right now, but it's that little L-shaped space. So that, because of course smoking was everywhere in these days, so that was a place where they could gather before dinner and, play bridge or whatever. So it gave them some space away from students, which was a real innovation under President Meneely's tenure.
Okay.
it's actually sort of a cascade of events. When Eliza Bailey Chapin Wheaton, one of the founders from the founding family, determined that she wanted Samuel Valentine Cole to be the first male president of Wheaton. So he was already on the Board of Trustees. He was congregational minister from Taunton. She determined that the way to save Wheaton Female Seminary was to have the trustees hire him as president. And he agreed to do that on the condition that Wheaton would become a college, would transform itself from being a seminary to being a college. And he obtained Mrs. Wheaton's agreement to that. And so that decision, and the trustees, partly because she offered to pay his salary during her lifetime, thought this was a fabulous idea. That began a series of events, including constructing more buildings. So for instance, when Emerson was constructed in 1908, Wheaton was still a seminary. So first you had Chapin Dormitory, and then the gymnasium in 1903, and then you had Larkham and Emerson built in 1908, and then Knapton was originally, the science building is now Knapton in 1911. I mean, these were all a series of events to make Wheaton look like a college, so that when it became a college in 1912, it already basically was one. I mean, he also changed expanded and adapted and changed the curriculum. He hired faculty members who had PhDs, which had not been the case beforehand. He hired more men, so there was more of a mix of men and women on the faculty. And so that decision to hire him shows how incredibly forward-looking Mrs. Wheaton was, because she saw potential in him. And they had this, what must have been a very serious, difficult conversation, and she agreed that she would support what he wanted to do and paid for all these buildings. And when she died in 1905, her entire, except for a few small legacies, her entire estate came to the seminary, which allowed the construction of all these buildings. But that all went back to that decision to hire Samuel Valentine Cole as the first male president. And that is what set in motion the entire history of Wheaton. Well, Chase has been renovated at least 3 times in the 35 years that I've been at Wheaton, and this is the most major, down to the studs kind of renovation. And I have to admit, I've only been down there once since it was renovated, but it certainly is much more bright. There seem to be more choices. Now it seems clean and crisp and welcoming in a very bright sort of way. Emerson has always, as you know, because of the paneling, always been a kind of darker, cozier kind of space. And it is my experience that not many people really look up. So I don't know how many people will really notice the difference in the lighting, which is, except for the furniture, the flooring and the furniture, which is going to be different because there's going to be soft seating, and a dance floor, I believe, is going to be permanently installed. The lighting is really the major change. All the paneling is staying the same, the clock is staying there, the fireplaces are actually going to be enhanced because they're going to actually put some fireplace equipment in front of them. It actually will be curious to me. I mean, it's my job to keep track of what Wheaton used to be as well as what it is becoming. So to me, these changes seem dramatic. It would be very interesting to know whether new students who come in who've never seen it before think that it's a mixture of styles. They might not. Or whether students who have been here for years or alumni come in and actually notice. It will be very interesting to me. to see when people notice the changes, what they identify as the major changes. I think that it's my understanding that, and certainly it's been my experience when I've walked through Emerson to go to the faculty dining room, for instance, that there've never, at least at lunchtime, there have never been many students there. So it will be interesting to see if these changes draw more students in. One would like to think that the current architects would want that to, that it would still be considered beautiful, and I'm sure that it will be in a new way.
Have the reviews over the years on the Wheaton food ever been good?
That's funny. When the only dining hall was in Old Metcalf, a big rambling wooden dormitory that has basically been replaced by all the buildings from Park Hall through Killam, students complained of the food. And when Emerson first opened in 1908 and had been going for a few years, students called it Codfish Castle because cod was served so often. Of course, now cod is one of the most expensive fish because it's been overfished, and because it was so easy to catch, and fish was easy to cook and quick to cook, and so they served it all the time. I think that that is really the memory that I have of students commenting on the food. So I'm sure that the food was much more seasonal in earlier times, and therefore much more repetitive. And so chances are students have been complaining about the food and college food and seminary food for all of time. I know during the seminary years, students would complain about the food, and Carolyn Cutler Metcalf, whose portrait is up there, complained to the trustees about the food. So I think that we always talk about comfort food. Food and mealtime is sort of a place in your life when you feel like you want to relax and enjoy yourself and your company and the food. And if the food is repetitive and that it's not as comforting as it might be. Now, I've been down to Chase once this year, and there certainly seemed to be a lot more, much larger range of food than previous visits that I made there. I used to go to the faculty dining room on a regular basis, so I'm not quite sure how that will be different now that everyone will go through the Emerson line, and then if you want to go to the faculty dining room, you can do that. But I think students are used to home cooking. They're used to what they have at home, and they don't get it at the college. And so I would expect that there are favorite meals that some people have, but they don't see them often enough. And when I was in college, we always had, when we had lasagna, there was always chocolate cake. You never got chocolate cake without lasagna. Now, talk about your calorie-laden meal, but that was everybody's favorite meal. And now that colleges offer much more variety in the food. I mean, up until relatively recently, the meal was the meal, and you ate as much of any part of it as you were willing to eat. There was not this wide variety of choices. So you would like to think that choice makes the eating experience better, but still where we all want all that comfort food all the time. I think that the potential is that it will become more of a gathering place than it has been recently. I mean, the last couple of times I've walked through it, there have been hardly any people there, students or anyone else, both in the faculty dining room and in the big dining room. Now that I go through at lunchtime, so maybe it's different at breakfast, at dinner. I don't know because I'm not going through to eat those meals. But I think that with the combination of seating possibilities and probably the upgraded lighting, I mean, it was, I have to admit, a pretty dim space with the original lighting. that probably student groups who are talking about assignments will be meeting there in some of the soft seating while other people are eating. I think that it has great potential for being more of a gathering place than it seems to have been recently. Now, what will be interesting to me is what effect that will have on the two cafes, both the Davis Spencer Cafe and the Belfour Hood Cafe, where a lot of people have had meetings, but the ambiance, the surfaces in both those spaces are relatively hard, so it's a different sound, it's a different experience to eat in those two places and to have meetings in those two places. So it'll be interesting to see if people gravitate toward Emerson for certain kinds of meetings, meeting your friends, talking about assignments, that sort of thing, than the two cafes, or Chase for that matter. I don't go down to Chase that often. This is such a huge campus, right? I hardly ever walk down to Chase. It used to be mobbed. It used to be that you could hardly find a seat in the faculty dining room. And the few times I've gone in the last couple of years, there's hardly been anyone there. So that, I know you're interested in the student side of things, but it's been interesting to me to observe the faculty staff dining room side. And from having been tremendously popular, it's really fallen off. Now, part of that might be because so many classes happen at lunchtime, but perhaps the changes will draw more people in together than has happened in the last, I would say, 5 to 7 years.